take it away.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you again for joining us. We have a great session coming up on bolstering our research workforce. And this is going to be an important conversation about what it takes to recruit and maintain a strong research and development workforce. On the panel are Dr. Chuck Barber, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the National Science Foundation, Dr. Marie Bernard, Chief Officer for Scientific Workforce Diversity at NIH, Dr. Maria Ryan, Vice President and Chief Clinical Officer at Colgate-Palmolive Company, and Dr.
Sudip, it looks like we lost Mike, so why don't you go ahead and jump in?
All right. Well, welcome everybody to this terrific panel on bolstering the scientific workforce. Mike was about to do introductions, and what I'm gonna do is tell you that on the website there are detailed backgrounds for all of our panelists. I'm going to dive right in. I want to thank you all for joining us today. The topic of this panel is bolstering our research workforce. And look, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart as the CEO of the AAAS. We are going to look at it from several different angles, and we're going to talk about what it means to each of the panelists and the challenges that we're all trying to rise to meet. Now, the reason why this subject is so important to me is that if we are going to do all the wonderful things that we think that science can do for us, that we think that discovery can do for us, if we're going to cure disease, if we're going to feed the hungry, if we're going to protect the planet, we're going to need everybody. We need scientists that are coming not just from Cambridge, Massachusetts and Palo Alto, California, but also scientists that are coming from the Mississippi Delta, the Appalachian Mountains, and the Central Valley of California. We're going to need scientists from everywhere because, frankly, we're in a globally competitive environment where scientific talent it doesn't just come from nowhere. It has to be nurtured and built and actually created so that it can support all those wonderful activities that we hope to see happen and that are being talked about here at the Health Forum. Now, I recently wrote about the fact that survival in many academic posts, including graduate students and postdocs, obliges many students to take out loans for living expenses. It has a negative effect, disproportionately negative effect on students of color and those from low-income households. And if you don't have a safety net, if you don't have parents at home who can provide that extra money, then a whole bunch of folks have to leave academia to earn a salary that is sufficient to support them and their families. Now, look, careers outside of academia and outside of research are valuable and rewarding. And I truly believe that. I don't think there's any such thing as an alternative pathway. However, society also needs a diverse and talented research workforce in academia and elsewhere. And so we've got to solve these problems. And so I'm going to start by turning to Chuck. Chuck, you've talked about moving beyond theory and into implementation related to bolstering our scientific workforce. Tell us about your new role with the National Science Foundation and the programs and initiatives from the CHIPS and Science Act that you're implementing to target, recruit, and retain individuals from underrepresented backgrounds and all backgrounds in STEM research.
Well, good afternoon, first of all, and on behalf of Dr. Poncha-Nathan from the NSF leadership, thank you all for having me. The CHIPS and Science Act actually defined my role in the statute. I'm actually the first Chief Diversity Officer to serve at the National Science Foundation, and while there are a plethora of requirements in the CHIPS and Science Act and the multiple executive orders, I'll just talk a little bit about some of the high leverage items that I'm doing to kind of really look at how we can leverage that full spectrum of diverse talent that society has to offer. And I think the overarching North Star is just really putting some things in place that teaches leaders and individuals across the country how we reimagine how diversity and meritocracy can work in harmony, without compromising one for the other, and so when you think about the new DEI laws and the SCOTUS decision, that makes it kind of tough to be able to do that. So one of the things I've done is I've built something called an underrepresentation tool. And what that tool does is it takes a very data-driven approach to leverage data from the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the American Community Survey, and the Department of Labor. And I've aligned that data by creating analogs matched to every federal occupational specialty in the federal government. And in doing so, now I can tell you the level of diversity that can be achieved if that segment of society were available at the national level, at the state level, and all the way down to the occupational specialty level. We've also taken into account different hypotheses and levers and projected BLS information. And now we can tell you how long it's going to take for us to reach population parity, based off of how we're using all of that data. So when I think about some of those levers that we're looking at, so if we update a position description, or if we make a targeted hiring event, now it alters the trajectory of when we're going to reach population parity. And so now I'm making underrepresentation actionable, through an equity lens. And it has nothing to do with quotas or affirmative action, but it's a matter of really making underrepresentation actionable. And there's some other things that we're doing too in terms of, how we're looking at potentially redefining metrics, with how we broaden participation across STEM. But I think that's one good key initiative when we think about how we really want to grow the workforce. That's a good initiative I think I wanted to highlight. I will also tell you that model and that initiative is actually being considered to being scaled across the entire federal government. OPM is looking at it, and they like what we're doing. And they want us to look to see how we can scale it across the federal government. So that's an initiative we're real proud of.
That's exciting, and it sounds almost like a precision tool for this work, which is terrific. Marie, let me turn to you. You've got 2 years under your belt now as the director of the NIH Unite initiative, and I'm curious, what excites you most about the workforce changes that you've been implementing through the program? What excites you most about the work you've been doing at NIH? Well, Marie, I think you're on.
More than 3 years, and I still forget to unmute. Thank you. It's exciting to be in the environment right now because NIH made a commitment. It's going on 2.5 years ago when we publicly unveiled the NIH Unite initiative with the very ambitious goal of ending structural racism. If we can pull up the slides that I sent. We have, over the course of this time, developed a cohesive group of 80+ volunteers who are prepared to address these issues. We started off kind of all talking a different language and having a different focus. We are now very focused on the people and the data, just as NSF is, and looking in basically 3 content areas: health disparities and minority health research, what we're doing internally, and yes, what we can do externally to help the workforce. Unite, as you may recall, is represented of 5 different work streams with that led to the acronym, but we're unified in these foci that you see represented here. It has led to notices of funding opportunities, such as an expansion of the Science Education Partnership Awards, previously led by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences only. Now 20 of our institute centers and offices have joined. And the beauty of it is that it's a K-12 STEM program, and it allows us to make outreach to that population that's very diverse, and recognizing that science identity is developed as early as middle school. We also recognize our colleagues at NSF have a real leadership role here, but we're trying to contribute. We also have something that we call the Research with Activities Related to Diversity Award that is giving researchers who have done great work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, but don't have NIH funding, the opportunity to get funding. And we think this is really important because people who are working in that area often spend so much time in their DEIA work that they're not able to move their research forward. They don't get recognized for it. This is an R01 that is just as valuable as an R01 for bench research and often contributes to getting tenure. Next. We also have developed new programs for instrumentation grants for resource-limited institutions. They're often institutions like it's historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, minority-serving institutions, and others that don't have much in the way of NIH funding. And this is allowing these institutions to get funds for not only research, but for their educational programs. And then finally, we have something called the Strong Initiative that's allowing institutions to assess what their needs, again, resource limited institutions, and develop an action plan. Next slide, please. I'm really excited about the DEI8 institutional prize that we are offering. My team is leading this on behalf of Unite and NIH. You can just click through 3 or 4 times since we get to the end of the slide. 2 more clicks. Thank you. This is to recognize institutions that have transformative culture systems and projects that have led to measurable change for a more inclusive environment. We launched this April 4th. We, as of September 12th, have a good number of institutions that have registered. We're looking forward to the applications a week from today, and we'll announce winners in December. So a lot that's going on, and it's really exciting.
Thanks, Marie. A lot to dig into there, which we're going to try and do here in a few minutes. I'm going to switch gears now. So we've now heard from 2 folks who are leaders in government. Now we're going to turn to two other sides of or 2 other angles on this subject. So first, let me turn to Jamelle. Now, Jamelle, you began your career as a researcher. I want you to tell us about some of the challenges you may have faced, as well as programs you've run and developed to assist students interested in a STEM career. And here I want to note that Jamelle, because we lost Mike to do the introductions, Jamelle is the Dr. Lewis Sullivan Science Policy Fellow at Research America. And I love that because I think many of us know Dr. Sullivan, and to see his name as on the fellowship that Jamelle occupies is really exciting. Jamelle, let me turn to you for that question.
So for the first part, just addressing some of the challenges going from, let's say, undergrad to my postdoc. So one thing that kept popping up is funding, mentorship. Those are going to be some of the 2 biggest things, because if there's no funding, you can't develop the students. So you can't send them to conferences. If papers need fees for publications, you don't have that. So you can have a student that ends up in a lab that's under-resourced, and that's bad for the development. So I've had that happen at multiple stages of my career where we just can't do much because we don't have the funding. Even if I am supported by training grants, the lab doesn't have enough money to run. So then you're just stuck doing pilot studies, and you're just stuck doing a bunch of stuff that can't even get out. So I've had many projects that just sat on the shelf because there wasn't enough money for my development. Even going to conferences, I'd usually fund those myself or look for other pots of money so I can actually get to some of these conferences. So if there are financial barriers in that training program for the students, they're going to struggle from start to finish. So in addition to the student having funding, the labs for sure have to have the funding. On top of that, they have to have the mentorship. That's very influential if you have a student that isn't exposed to academia, doesn't know how to navigate the environments. If you have faculty members that are interested in the development of their students, they can mentor them, they can help them find resources, they can advocate for them and help them get past some of these barriers so they can make it to the finish line. So I'd say funding, resources, mentorship, those are some of the challenges that I've faced a lot going through undergraduate to my postdoc at different levels. And as far as programs, I've been involved in many programs going from middle school up through undergraduate and graduate. So within a Natural Science Foundation, they have the iTest program for innovative technology for students and teachers. So I worked on grades 6 through 8. We're in rural communities where we're getting them involved with STEM. And then also 9 through 12, we're working with high school students, getting them involved in biomechanics. So I worked with that middle school through high school. And then when I was at Virginia Tech, we worked with the Black College Pre-College Institute and Explore VT, taking high school rising juniors and seniors in high school, exposing them to academia, different career, different majors, different career paths, so that they can get the information they need prior to applying to different universities. Outside of that, I worked with SOAR. We're identifying barriers, undergraduates and graduates at our institution, and we're looking for ways to fill those gaps, whether it be funding, advocating for them, like even if I have to go knock on doors, financial aid, dean's office for all the colleges, like whatever they needed, I went out and I tried to find it. Outside of that, the postdoc level, developing programs for alternative careers. So instead of looking at that PI route with research and teaching, what are other academic careers where you can use your PhD? So like community engagement, programs in STEM, outreach, things like that. So you can actually use your degree in creative ways that faculty members may not have exposed students to because they don't do that work themselves. So a lot of different programs and a lot of different ins and outs.
Thanks, Jamelle. That's a great way to kick off here. I think we're going to have a great conversation amongst us, because some of the things that you've outlined as needs are some of the things that that Marie and Chuck have outlined as things they're trying to accomplish through the agencies. Now I'm going to turn to Maria. Maria, you're bringing the angle of industry in the private sector to this.
Yes.
I'd love to hear your take on the questions of how do we, how do we ensure that students and folks who go into STEM degrees, they stay with it. They stay with it, and they're actually retained by your company or by others in academia. How do we keep folks in these fields?
Yeah, Sudip, I think that, some of the work that Marie talked about at the NIH and Chuck at the NSF is important, but industry also needs to play a role in ensuring that there's diversity within the communities. And if you look into the dental profession, only 5.9% of all dentists in the US are Hispanic and 3.8% are Black. So the numbers are very, very low. And so our company, and I hope many others too, are really deeply committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our profession, in the dental profession, as well as in oral, cranial, and facial research. We recognize the benefits of patient-dentist concordance and clinical outcomes for underrepresented minorities, and we shouldn't take that for granted. It shouldn't be overlooked. Over the past 30 years, we've worked with a number of different foundations, including the National Dental Association, which is an association of Black dentists, and they have a foundation. And together we created scholarships, because it was mentioned before by Jamelle and others that the burden of debt is an issue that needs to be addressed. And so these scholarships, Audacity to Dream Scholarship, which was created, has touched the lives of over 3,500 African-American students pursuing careers in dentistry. And the debt and the tuition is a big barrier in dentistry. And so creating scholarships is important to support students regardless of financial means. But also Jamelle talked about reaching out early, and the earlier the better, to encourage STEM students, people to go into STEM to begin with, and to encourage STEM students. And so there are various programs in a number of universities. We happen to support one at Harvard, which is called the Bridge to Dental School program, which provides pre-dental mentorship to students in college who want to go on for a career. And I think the mentorship, as well as the financial support, are really essential to our success in keeping students in STEM and bringing them into the professions, whether it's dentistry or medicine.
That's terrific, Maria. Well, it sounds like, what I've always found extraordinary is that that in many sectors, folks are working on the same problem from a slightly different perspective, and have come up with different and varying programs and activities to try and address these problems. I'm curious, what's the crosstalk amongst industry and the federal government? Is there, Maria, obviously the dentists that are being trained, a lot of them being trained probably on research grants provided by the NIH. They may have gotten a graduate research fellowship from the National Science Foundation. How much discussion happens amongst industry and government?
Well, we do actually talk, which is a good thing. We look for mechanisms by which we can help to assist in funding postgraduate training and students to move in those directions. Actually, we created a recent scholarship called TORCH, which is called Trailblazers and Oral Health Research Scholars of African Heritage. And it's a postdoctoral fellow program that was created actually with someone from the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research, working with us to really carve out what that might look like and how we could support students to go into research and help us to address the racial disparities that we see in oral health research.
That's great. Thanks, Maria. And that makes me feel good that crosstalk is happening. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to start with Jamelle on this, and then turn to Marie and Chuck. And Jamelle, you mentioned that resources and funding for the lab are also really important. And the question for you is, are there barriers that laboratories face, or that minority serving institutions face in their efforts to increase grant submissions and grant awards, like lack of time or knowledge or infrastructure or collaborators, or even the submission deadline timing during the year? Are there things that get in the way? And then I'm going to turn to Marie and Chuck to sort of ask if they're hearing the same things, and if some of the programs that they're talking about are going to help address some of those challenges. Jamelle?
So at least for me, at some institutions, time is a big barrier, because if you're at a primarily teaching university, you're going to have different commitments and different time if you're primarily research. So if you have a high teaching load, it's going to be difficult for you to go out there and write grants and submit these and get them funded. And if you don't have the offices like a grants office or like these larger units that can help with grant submissions and managing those grants, you're at a smaller institution, you're going to have issues managing them. So it's a heavy workload if you're at a primarily teaching oriented institution versus if you're at a primarily research oriented institution. So it just depends on the different types, but minority serving institutions, they have additional barriers.
Yeah, thank you. Chuck, I know that I remember Ponch was talking about once with me, sort of an NSF 101 or Grant 101 to sort of fill in the gap of some of the infrastructure that sometimes at the more research-oriented universities for institutions that maybe are heavier in teaching. Is that one way y'all address this, or are there other programs and activities that y'all do?
Yeah, I think that is one way, but there are other things that we're looking at too, but I think the overarching issue is that, regardless of what efforts we put in place, I think these efforts are going to have to move from just being performative efforts to more transformative efforts, and so regardless of how many resources we toss at it, how many policy updates we make, we have to get to a point to where we move to more of a transformative state, and so when I think about, what we learned with the SCOTUS decision, on affirmative action, we have an opportunity now to even rethink measures of effectiveness, rethink how we can quantify outreach, how we can quantify engagement to kind of really address these different barriers that we see and ensure that we are leveraging those resources the right way. And so I think it's a combination of things, but I think that overarching issue is how do you move these efforts from being just performative issues to more transformative efforts? So
I love hearing you say that, Chuck. Marie, you and I've had conversations about not being performative before, and how we can all be doing concrete and important things. Tell me what you think in terms of the how to increase grant submissions, grant awards, and how to overcome some of the barriers that Jamelle talked about.
Now, that's something that we've been looking at very carefully, looking at the data, looking at the success rates for applications that come from minority serving institutions and from other institutions that may not be as well resourced. And we recognize that we need to be more proactive. So for instance, the STRONG initiative that I talked about is targeted at those institutions to do their assessment of what they need research-wise and to develop a plan for it. We have a concept that has been approved, and usually when a concept is approved, 90% of the time or plus, it becomes a funding opportunity. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that there'll be a funding opportunity to build upon that, after they've identified what their needs are, additional resources to help build those things. Instrumentation grant program is also a means of trying to address that. And then the National Institute of General Medical Sciences that has led what is called the BUILD initiative, developed in response to the Ginter report that showed that there was a persistent gap in funding for African American and Black scientists, are looking at extending the BUILD initiative, particularly in sponsored research programs, to help under-resourced institutions to do that. Finally, looking at the data, it's very clear that applications to scientists at minority serving institutions often don't fare as well as from more resource institutions or research intensive institutions. And that we have a lot going on at NIH, 27 different institutes and centers, and interest in trying to be helpful. So my team, the Cosworth team, will be leading an initiative that we're calling ERA, Engagement and Access for Research Active Institutions, institutions with a historical commitment to underrepresented populations, that grant degrees in STEM and health-related sciences, and that have not much in the way of NIH research project grant funding. So we'll kind of be like the eHarmony, bringing the two together so that the institutions can take advantage of what we do have, because there's a lot that's underutilized.
That's great. I love the analogy. It's certainly successful in that world, so it should be successful in this world as well. Chuck, you brought up something I think is really important for us to talk about, which is the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action for college admissions, and what, if any, impact it has on the work that you all are doing. And so I'd love to just put it out there especially for you and Marie to talk about. But then Maria also, what is the impact? Are there implications from that, what seemed like a relatively narrow decision on the work that you all are doing? Chuck, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I would absolutely tell you that decision has absolutely kind of impacted, the approach, particularly, to me, I think it kind of helps us to start to rethink how we redefine what a meritocracy is really supposed to intended to be. I think when you think about a meritocracy, it doesn't take into account different starting lines in life. It doesn't take into account potential bias in our talent management systems and other frameworks. And so when I think about the SCOTUS decision, it kind of really starts to prompt folks to really rethink what affirmative action was really intended to be, which in my opinion, it gives us justification to rethink meritocracy. If I were king for a day, I would put some things in place so we have a multicultural meritocracy, and so that kind of gets you back into the conversation of equity versus equality, making sure folks have the right resources to get to those equitable outcomes, that we want to achieve. But I also think that SCOTUS decision is going to really prompt us to be more thoughtful about how we future-proof this work, because they're depending on what side of the aisle you're on, folks are going to use that as an opportunity to weaponize this work or even dismantle DEI efforts moving forward. And so when I think about language that we put in public-facing documents, how we even define DE&IA, to the strategy that we're putting in place, at NSF, the focus is going to move more towards cultural intelligence, and not just focusing on what the acronym is. Because in my opinion, DEIA is more than just an acronym. It's the gateway to that psychological safety and organizational change work we need to get to those DEIA outcomes. And so when I think about the SCOTUS decision, and even these DEI laws, that's where it kind of takes me to.
Thanks, Chuck. Marie.
Yes, I would, really echo what Chuck has said. I would say that from the NIH perspective, we think of diversity writ large. We think of, and the data supported. We think of geographic diversity, disciplinary diversity, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, rural residency, disability, all of those things and more contribute to the perspectives that scientists will bring to the table. And they're really important and valuable for making sure that we get a full view of the really challenging problems we're trying to address in biomedical and behavioral research. We have not, we adhere to federal law, and we do not fund based upon race, but clearly the SCOTUS decision, although seemingly tailored narrowly, it's a constitutional interpretation. So we're waiting for further analysis and recommendations as to whether there's anything more that we need to do. The question often arises, what about states that have laws that preclude diversity, equity, and inclusion? And our viewpoint is that we adhere to federal law when applicant institutions have questions as to whether or not they qualify for things that we are putting forward in our notices of funding opportunity. They should consult with their internal counsel. I will say that we recently gave out several awards for our faculty institutional recruitment for sustainable transformation program. And some of those went to states that on the surface seem to have things that precluded DEI, but they did accept our money.
Funny how that is. Resources open doors. Maria, quickly, are there implications in industry?
There are workforce issues that we face, and we talked about the numbers of people in the profession, and certainly as we try to recruit into our company where, diversity, equity, and inclusion are very important, because, we're here to serve all the people of the world, and you have to have people here who will make sure that when we're conducting our research, that we're working on programs that really will impact the oral health related diseases of underserved communities throughout the world. And that's why we partner with universities like Howard and Meharry, really to ensure that we expand the academic research of these institutions and provide their students with research opportunities, which will position them to be better academicians and public health advocates and dental practitioners. And anything that really will affect that pipeline is going to impact our ability to recruit those people. So I think we have to continue to help out, whether it's financially, through mentorship, and create the communities that will enable us to ensure that we have a diverse workforce.
Thanks, Maria. You brought up a couple of things that are, I guess, they're tactics, right? They're the salaries. I'm curious. I'm going to turn to Jamelle for this. What are some of the tactics that we can use to help make again, looking at it broadly across getting folks who are from lower income backgrounds, folks who are from underrepresented backgrounds into the scientific workforce, things like remote hybrid work. Even I really don't know what those tactics might be. What makes it easier for a person who doesn't have maybe doesn't have the history, someone to show them the way in the sciences, or who doesn't have the parental safety net to help you out? What are some of those tactics? Do people want to do remote work? I'm curious.
As far as the tactics, so it's just identifying them early, and then whatever organization you're a part of, being upfront with the resources and services that you have. So if you're at a place where you're getting in a new cohort of workers or students, wherever you're at, have your diverse staff meet them up front saying, at this institution, at this company, here are the resources available to you. Here's potential mentors. If you have issues, come to these people. We can help you navigate these issues, and they sort of mentor and assist to get them integrated very quickly so that they are retained. And they also have people to go to when they struggle, because whether it's students or whether it's a job, you're going to struggle eventually. So knowing that you have that resource and that network up front will go a long way in retaining people.
Thanks, Jamelle. I think that's a great set of tactics that I know that a lot of organizations, including ours at AAAS, are trying to incorporate. I know that we're approaching the end of our time. I'm going to ask one last question for everybody, and this last question is, it's what is the definition of success in building and retaining a diverse, robust research workforce across the nation? And here I want you to think about in terms of both making sure that it is a diverse workforce, but also in terms of we have the numbers that we need to fulfill all the opportunity and potential that we see in the sciences. So maybe I can start with Marie on this one.
From my viewpoint, the definition of success will be when we get to the point that you can't predict who's the principal investigator on a grant that we are funding based upon race, ethnicity, or gender, that you are able to see a full reflection of the wide variety of perspectives that might be brought forward from the middle school level onward in the people who are applying and who are getting funded by the National Institutes of Health.
It's a great vision. Maria, how about you for industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to ensure that everyone is seated at the table, and that, recruitment and retention is so important. And without creating a community that people feel that they're represented in and feel comfortable, and I think it's a catch-22. I was just at a meeting at Michigan, and at that meeting, we talked about how hard it is to recruit people when there aren't more people who look like them. But yet somebody's got to be the first one, right? And so you have to, continue to build that community to get to a point, like Marie said, where that's not an issue anymore. People walk in the door and they say, every place is for me, right? I'm represented here. And I think that will be success. But until we get there, those pioneers are so important in really building that community for us to get to that point where everybody feels that they're represented everywhere they go.
Yeah, everybody feels that sense of belonging. I think that's terrific. Chuck, how about you? What's a measure of success?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say I won't tie it to a number. That's for sure, because I think the landscape is going to be so dynamic. When you think about how the demography of society is going to change over the next 20 to 25 years, we're not going to know who's in the minority, who's in the majority. The lines are going to be blurred, and I think there's going to be an increased focus on intersectionality because folks are going to, relate to more than one social demographic, and so for me, success is going to be, when we can put, controls in place that we can continuously assess equity, to ensure that our workforce represents, the representative labor force of society, from an equity perspective. And it's got to be dynamic because again, the demography is going to continuously change, but we have to have mechanisms to continuously assess equity, to continuously look at these barriers as we bring folks, in the front door of a workforce. And then at the same time, we need to be creating an environment where folks belong. We need to bring in folks who want to be here, so that means we have to really do this work from a culture perspective to be able to do it. So I think once you can put some controls in place that can continuously do that, to me, that's what success looks like.
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, thanks for bringing up intersectionality. You're right. As the demography changes, there's going to be all those intersections going to matter almost as much as the silos we put ourselves in. All right, Jamelle, I'm going to give you the last word. As I look around this virtual room, I want, if there's any of us that are going to see this vision fulfilled, it is you. So, Jamelle, what's your definition of success?
At least for me, success is being able to take someone that has nothing and get them to a STEM career, whether that's at the bachelor, master's, PhD, postdoc level, because not everyone has the funding, they don't have the resources. But as long as you can get somebody that doesn't have family support, they probably have to work a full-time job. You can get one of those groups of students through the pipeline, that's success. It's harder to reach that group than it is to reach people that have parents or guardians that can fund whenever they need extra money. So if you can reach the hardest to reach students, that's my idea of success.
Thanks, Jamelle. Well, look, if we can get to the visions that the four of you have just described, we're going to go a long way towards ensuring that we both have a globally competitive workforce, a workforce that's going to create the discoveries that we want, and also the fairness that I think is absolutely the right thing to do for the country. So thank you very much for a terrific, insightful conversation. I'm going to turn it over now to Sheila Murphy to take us over to the next session.
All right, thank you, Sudip, so much, and thank you to all our panelists on this panel, which was a really terrific discussion, and all the fireside chats and discussions and panelists from earlier today. We're close to the end of our first day of forum programming, and I want to remind the folks who are in Washington, D.C., that our sessions tomorrow are going to be in person at George Washington University, and all the details are on our website. So if you are in Washington and would like to join, please do so. If you have not yet registered, I'm going to put my colleague Trent's email in the chat, and you can email him to register for tomorrow's events. The recorded sessions from today will be posted on this Zoom events platform later this week, and they'll also be on our YouTube channel later this month. We hope you'll watch them and continue the conversation. Now, please join us for our last session today. And we really have saved a really good one for the end. This conversation is going to be between FDA Commissioner Dr. Rob Califf and Research America board member Nancy Brown, who's the CEO of the American Heart Association. So we will see you back in the lobby at 5:15. Thank you.